Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Burke. Hello and welcome back to the podcast with me, Latika Burke. Well, before we get into today's episode, I'm very excited and proud to announce that the podcast has its first sponsor. It's Political Tours, run by former New York Times and BBC correspondent Nicholas Wood. Now, Political Tours is my kind of travel because I'm not really one to sit on a beach when I go abroad. Nothing wrong with that, but I think you can see from my Substack that when I go to a different country, I want to get under its political skin and meet its movers and shakers. And Nicholas came up with the idea of Political Tours when he was a globetrotting correspondent too, correctly assessing that there would be travellers with a serious interest in current affairs who want to roam like a reporter, getting to meet and question politicians and the commentators in faraway countries. I call this travelling intelligently, and with Political Tours, you can too. They're heading to Taiwan later this year, one of my absolute favourite trips of last year. And in June, they're heading to Ireland to explore the possibility of a united Ireland. And on that trip, expect to meet leaders on all sides and quiz leaders of the ex-paramilitary groups. All the details are at politicaltours.com. Tell Nick and Karen that I recommended you. Okay, time to get into it. Well, today's guest is Jonathan Ashworth. He was supposed to be in the Labor cabinet, but in some of the shock results of the last election, lost his very, very safe Labor seat to a Gaza independent, one of just a handful who came from nowhere to oust Labor MPs in safe seats. Now, Jonathan Ashworth is one of the most experienced hands in the current crop of Labor Party figures, and he worked for Gordon Brown. So he would have been one of the few to have sat around that cabinet table who had experience in Downing Street before. But it was not to be. Since losing, he has gone to head up a very influential Labor think tank called Labor Together. And this is the faction or the grouping from where Prime Minister Keir Starmer grew and finds his political support. So Jonathan Ashworth remains a frontline attack dog for the government in the UK. And he is also, of course, still extremely closely connected to the Labor Party government. And I think you will see him try and make a comeback at the next election, possibly even sooner. But for now, he spends his time examining how to keep the Labor Party competitive, particularly here in Britain, a country that traditionally favours Conservative governments. So it was my great pleasure to head down to Labor Together offices in Millbank, next to Westminster, and catch up with Jonathan Ashworth. Jon Ashworth, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here with you.
Well, we've known each other. I think you're one of my earliest contacts since I moved to the UK, which means we must be nearly hitting 9 or 8 years that we've known each other. And it has been an absolute whirlwind in British politics in the time that I've been here. When I arrived, you were still in the European Union. David Cameron was the Prime Minister. Barack Obama was the President of the United States. Now we have a tumultuous period in Labor Party history and an emerging, perhaps, star in Keir Starmer, something no one would have suspected happening after his election. You're looking at me quizzically. Is the Keir Starmer we're seeing the Keir Starmer you thought he would always be?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I can't quite believe that you've been here that long, but we've known each other for so long because you continue to look so youthful, of course.
Flattery will get you nowhere.
But where have the years gone? And but you are right. There's been huge seismic changes in the United Kingdom these last 10 years or so. Brexit, a period when the Labour Party was led by the most left-wing leader, the most hard left leader in its history, and there were genuine questions about whether the Labour Party in its form would survive. And then, of course, Keir Starmer was elected as leader of the Labour Party 5 years ago, not even 5 years ago, nearly 5 years, just under 5 years ago, and has completely transformed the prospects of the Labour Party where people wrote him off. And I think that's one of the things with Keir Starmer. People always write him off. They always underestimate him. You can walk around Westminster and lots of smart Alex will say he's not as political as other people. He doesn't understand, or he's not as adept at the art of politics. Yet he's the one who sat there as Prime Minister with over 400 Labour MPs. And it's usually those smart Alex who are nowhere near becoming Prime Minister. So don't underestimate Keir Starmer. I first met him, oh my gosh, probably about 2006, 2007, when he was an ambitious lawyer thinking about making his way to Parliament. And I worked for Gordon Brown. So I've known him a long time. Not been super close to him throughout those years, but I've seen him up close. And he has a steel. And he has a hunger. And he's ambitious, and ambitious for the country. And I think you've seen that steel in these last few weeks on the world stage.
How do you explain a prime minister who really seemed to take on the job with this huge majority, as you say, but languish in it in his first few months? In fact, it was riddled by errors, it was riddled by scandal. And it's only now that an international crisis faces him. Ironically, I have been covering you guys for this long, and obviously I take an interest in your foreign policy. He said so little about foreign policy. And yet it's into that void that he steps and begins to define himself. What is it about this particular moment that you think got to Keir Starmer, in that he understood what the world was facing and what he could bring to it? Because I would say not all leaders are doing it at the moment.
Well, to slightly paraphrase or Trotsky quote, which is not what you wouldn't expect. It's not expected of me to quote.
I need my coffee now.
Trotsky said, "You might not be interested in war, but war's interested in you. You might not be interested in foreign policy, but foreign policy's interested in you." And the weeks of recent times have really brought that into sharp focus. Every Labour Prime Minister gets elected wanting to turn around the economy, wanting to create good, well-paid jobs, wants to see the economy thrive, and wants to fix public services. That's really in the DNA of Labour politicians. And that's not to say the Conservatives do not have an interest in those matters. But really, Labour likes to consider itself as the party of jobs, increased wages, decent terms and conditions in the workplace, and quality public services. So every Prime Minister comes in expecting to be focused. Labour Prime Minister comes in expecting to be focused on those issues. Yet foreign affairs quickly come to the fore, and particularly now. And I would say to my colleagues who sit in the cabinet, as you know, sadly, I was denied that opportunity. But I would say to my colleagues, yes, we still have to focus on the domestic agenda. The polling that we do here at Labour Together suggests that if you do not turn around the economy and ease the cost of living, if you do not turn around the NHS, if you do not bring order and stability to your immigration policy, you will have challenges and potentially be in trouble at the next general election, as other incumbent parties of the world have found. But the old assumptions about a rule-based international order have been upended in the last few weeks, in the first 51 days of President Trump. And that means these questions are going to dominate the next 4 years. It means we've got to take serious decisions about the future of our military capability and our security and defence expenditure. And it was welcome and important that Keir Starmer announced an increase to 2.5% alongside an ambition to 3%. I want to see us go further and get to 3% as quickly as we can, and want to see more.
Do you want that sooner?
I would like to see that sooner, but I'm well aware of the fiscal position.
But how would we pay for that?
Well, exactly. The fiscal position in the United Kingdom is one of huge challenge, because we are at the very edges of investor sentiment. We've seen that in the budget most recently, the Chancellor Rachel Reeves take good decisions to invest in public services, but we've seen some nervousness on the bond market. You know, some people are suggesting that the UK should do a carve out for like Germany's doing. I'm not convinced that's realistic given where the bond markets have been in recent weeks. So we're going to have to take some tough decisions.
Well, that leaves taxes or cutting spending, right?
Well, the government is going to have to take some tough decisions, because this issue of international security is going to dominate the next 4 years. The second thing is that we're going to have to think about our industrial strategy as well. We here at Labour Together have done some work thinking about critical minerals and rare earths. I mean, look, this is very topical now because of...
You're speaking my language.
Yeah, this is incredibly topical now because of what President Trump is hoping to get out of Ukraine. I was also reading somewhere yesterday that the White House or the Americans are looking at trying to do a deal with the DRC, I believe, about critical minerals. I mean, the countries that want to invest in their industrial base, in modern manufacturing, and indeed, if you want to invest in green technologies, in AI, in quantum computing as well, all the industries that we know will drive growth of the future, critical minerals and rare earths are absolutely vital. At the moment, we're completely dependent on Chinese supply chain. So we've got to look at how we bring more security to our own supply chains when it comes to critical minerals. We've seen China ban the export of minerals like gallium, which were used in semiconductors, absolutely vital for the industries of the future. So that is an example of one area where our industrial policy is going to have to be reorientated. And domestic industrial policy, domestic economic policy is clearly interlinked with your trade policy and your foreign affairs policy like never before. So that's one area that we've been working on. We've also begun to think about space and our dependency on satellites and what that means for the UK space agency and our own.
Is what Elon doing and his control of Starlink, which of course is operating in Ukraine and is vital to their survival. Does that spook you?
Yes, this is brilliant. All of these questions have to be brought to the fore. And what that means is that we've got to take a long, hard look at our own industrial base, supply chains, and our own security. That is now integral. We have to do that both as a United Kingdom and as a set of European nations.
European, I would hope, I'll just fly a little Australian flag because we have critical minerals, and we have a trade deal with you.
Now, I was talking about the supply chains into Europe, but yes, I mean...
Yes, there's heaps of things we could do together on this.
Yeah, we should be doing more with South American countries, with Australia, obviously, Africa, countries as well. Look, there are parts of Europe which do mine critical minerals. We've got tin here in the UK, which is a vital. We've got to think about our stockpiles of lithium. A full new approach to this now has to be adopted. The previous government was criticised for being asleep at the wheel. This government is hopefully publishing a strategy later this year.
Well, you're going to be political. I'm going to be political. I mean, all your government's doing so far is lots of reviews at China or a defence review. I mean, the time is now. There's no more time to review. We need to get going.
Yeah, but we've been in for 7 months. And it's understandable that you'd want to audit what you've inherited, because they did inherit a mess. So just to finally answer your very first question about the missteps, because I'm a politician who likes to answer questions directly, even if I'm very verbose and it takes me 10 minutes to get there. Look, the reason there was challenges for this government when it got elected is because it did inherit a burning skip in the public finances. Public services were broken. We had an immigration system broken, and the public finances a mess. That has meant some very, very tough and unpopular decisions the government has had to take, and nobody likes it when governments take unpopular decisions.
Maybe, but no one was forcing Keir Starmer to accept free seats from Labor Party donors. These are the unforced errors I'm referring to that actually did give him a bad reputation starting out that he didn't need to have.
Well, I mean, the politicians have been given these sorts of things throughout history, and it's all declared.
Doesn't happen in other countries, I've got to say. Okay, let's move on. You express this ambition. I've talked to a lot of Labor MPs about this too. Behind the scenes, there's a desire for that 3% to be reached sooner than what Keir Starmer stated. How soon, and what do you think fiscally the British people will tolerate? Personally, I think British people probably would accept a security tax. So I was just in Estonia last year. They're raising their taxes to pay for security. Other countries are, of course, as you said, in Europe, going for more debt. Some will obviously have to cut spending. What's the threshold? What are the specific things you think the British people would do in order to save Europe?
Well, remember, the British people have been suffering from one of the highest tax burdens on record. I mean, it's remarkable that Conservatives pride themselves on being low tax, and they hammered the British people with tax rise after tax rise. It's why the Labour Party quite rightly made a number of solemn pledges around personal taxation in its manifesto. And the Labour Party is not going to break those pledges, in my view. When trust in politics is so low, I think it'd be very difficult for the Labour Party to break those pledges, although I understand that international situation has transformed rapidly in the last few weeks. Look, if you can't do tax, you have got to look for savings in public expenditure to make your sums add up. But also, remember, if you can get growth in the economy, from the proceeds of that growth, you can reinvest in your public services and defence. And it's why getting growth is so important for this government. You'll just see, just this week, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, outlining a whole series of reforms with various bits of regulatory bureaucracy which hold back infrastructure build, housing build. This government is going to hack away at great thickets of red tape and bureaucracy, which is stopping things getting built in this country. If we can get things built in this country again, we used to be the engineers and the builders of the world.
I know.
And when was the last time we built anything on time and on budget in this country? So if we can hack away at all those, undergrowth of bureaucracy holding so much back, that is one of the things we could do.
But that's long term. You're going to need savings or funds pretty immediately, I would assume.
Well, we've already made a significant commitment on defence by cutting aid expenditure, which is a big deal for a Labour government to do, right?
Yeah, but that's politically easy. Come on. There's not many voters in the Red Wall who say, I'm really upset, Keir Starmer, you cut foreign aid.
Yeah, but it's the Labour government who, in many ways, led international coalitions on increasing aid expenditure and debt relief back in the 90s and 2000s. It's part of Labour's soul. So to be cutting aid is a big decision for a Labour government in the circumstances and of the fiscal position we're in. Understandable, because we do need to increase our defence expenditure. But yes, you are right. Increasing to 3% is going to entail some tough decisions, but it's why you've got to get growth in the economy. If you can get growth in the economy at higher levels of what it was back in the day. I mean, look, growth has crawled along since the financial crash of 2008. I think it's only increased per head by about, 0.5% per head. If the economy would grow at the levels that it was running at up until the financial crash of 2008, the economy would be about 40% bigger. I mean, that is the scale and the drop-off of growth in this country since that financial crash.
That's a Western Europe problem as well.
Sure, but we've got to start taking decisions. We've got to hack away at some of these regulations holding back growth. We've got to get building. We've got to take on NIMBYs who refuse to have things built in their backyard. We've got to look at the welfare reforms to get people back to work. We've got to look at how we invest in our industries. By the way, investing in defence is good for jobs. Investing in securing supply chains, whether it's about critical minerals or whether it's about satellite technology, is good for jobs. So actually, some of these military decisions in themselves will contribute to economic growth as well. Or defence decisions will contribute to economic growth.
You mentioned before diversifying away from China on things like critical minerals. Is there now a move to diversify away also from the United States, particularly when it might come to things like defence industrial base?
Well, I think what recent weeks have shown us is that old rules-based order and the assumptions associated with the rules-based order are now called into question. We have got, in my view, an approach to foreign policy where it's about strong men and their spheres of influence, where they are looking to make the decisions on what they think is in their broader territory and what that means for their own country. In that context, I think the UK and European nations are going to have to take some decisions about their own defence and military infrastructure. Absolutely. But
You mean not buying necessarily American kit?
no, I don't necessarily mean that. But I mean, look, we've got to all of we're doing the strategic defence review, and I think all of these questions would have to be looked at and covered in that strategic defence review. But remember, though, I think my instinct is there will still be cooperation. We have to cooperate with the United States over our nuclear deterrent, for example. I cannot imagine a world where that cooperation would ever come to an end.
I don't think the Canadians ever imagined a world where they'd be threatened with annexation and economic punishment. I mean, unfortunately, those assumptions are not safe to make anymore.
No. Well, this is why we are living in remarkable times. And to continue my theme of quoting communists, which again,
Big things I never thought Jon Ashworth would say, but here we go.
Labour Party members listening to this will be spitting out their tea at me quoting communists. But there are decades when nothing happens and weeks when decades happens. That was Lenin. we're in one of those periods.
We'll have the trifecta soon. You were at the Democratic convention.
Yeah.
What did they get wrong?
Oh, God. I was at the Democratic convention. It's really interesting. Incumbents have been on the run. Incumbents have been falling by the wayside the world over. Tories hammered in the UK. Democrats hammered. Scholz, SDP, hammered. Modi lost significant support. I think a world in which we've had high inflation, energy price hikes, has seen voters quite rightly take that out and understandably take that out on incumbents out of the ballot box. The thing that struck me at the Democratic convention is, given that people's economic concerns were so front and centre of voters' mind, how little focus there was on the economy. I came away from that convention, I actually said it on the George Osborne Ed Balls podcast, thinking, well, yeah, this is a convention where there's lots of razzmatazz and mazel dazzle, which they're great at over there at these conventions. We have hip-hop stars, we had Oprah Winfrey, I think we had Pink, lots of celebrities. I think Stevie Wonder was there. I mean, the razzmatazz, yeah. But I remember thinking, if you're a working family in Wisconsin who's struggling to pay your groceries because your paycheck has been stretched and stretched and stretched, there's nothing for you here. There's no message to you. And what struck me is that the Republicans convention with Donald Trump, he was talking to working class America. He was talking to people whose paychecks had been squeezed, who were struggling with the groceries, were struggling to pay for the new pair of trainers for their kids on the sports team. Whereas the Democrats had nothing. It was all about cultural issues. It was all about abortion. I totally get that, given I'm a strong supporter of women's reproductive rights, the women's right to make decisions over their own body. Totally get that. But I just felt that they dialed up on these issues and had nothing to say for working families who were struggling to pay their rent, struggling to pay for their groceries. And I was not surprised when the Harris campaign lost and Trump won as a consequence.
Did you know at the convention you were watching a loser then?
I did turn to some of my friends there and said, I don't think this is going to do it.
Ouch. Okay, what are the lessons for the left worldwide? Australia is approaching an election. Here in the UK, you have a threat not even from the Conservatives, but a populist right in reform. How do you keep these forces at bay, both the overreach from the left in terms of focusing on the trans, the increasing minority sectors, I would say, to the point where you lose sight of the majority, and then on the right, this grievance politics where easy, simple solutions, often very hostile solutions, seem to be working with the public?
Well, first of all, I mean, what we do here at Labour Together is that we are absolutely preoccupied with election strategy and how parties win elections and how parties lose elections. That's the first thing. But the mistake that politicians and poor generals make is they sometimes think they're fighting the last war. It is certainly true that 2024 and these early months of 2025 that were about incumbents getting punished, particularly one-term incumbents. Indeed, I've seen you write about this, and as always with your writing, persuasive and eloquent. But there's just a few straws in the wind actually now, which have made me think again about, is this a moment as the populist right at its peak? Pierre Poilievre's figures, the Canadian Conservatives, were pretty good.
20 points ahead.
But now look what's happening. Carly's just got elected as a Canadian Liberal Prime Minister. The Liberals' figures have gone up. Canadian figures have gone down. The Canadian race is much, much more competitive than it was a few weeks ago. I mean, yeah, look, Albanese is behind in Australia. He definitely is. But the coalition against it is not that far ahead. Still a competitive race there. He could do it. He could pull it out of the bag. I'm not saying he is, by the way, but, I'm just saying that a few months ago, everyone was saying, if you're incumbent, you're finished. Things are shifting quickly. It's certainly the case that the decisions of the populist right in the White House have given impetus to the Canadian Liberal campaign, but it's certainly hurting Collier. And over here, it causes huge problems for reform. Right? When I go on the media, I point out that Farage is has spent his political career sort of fawning over Putin, being far too sympathetic to them, in my view, waving the white flag to them, essentially. Actually, it's causing huge ructions for them. They're in turmoil at the moment, as they've obviously fallen out and kicked out this MP. But the bigger problem for them is that their voter base back Ukraine.
Yes. It's very different to MAGA, isn't it?
Yeah. People in this country, know that Russia is a threat. Just this week, Russia talking about the UK being one of the biggest warmongers in the world. Voters are not pro-Putin in the United Kingdom because they're an aggressor on our doorstep.
And sometimes on your streets.
So sometimes on our streets. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So, the idea that somehow that the reform populists right here are necessarily going to get anywhere with the same playbook, I think has begun to be called into question. The other thing is that we do a lot of polling here at Labour Together. And one of the things that we're also finding is that the bunch of voters who could go reform, who are Labour voters, this is a bunch of people who have been voting reform for Brexit Party for some time now. But the ones who were Labour voters in the last election, who could go reform then, there's 2 or 3 issues which they're motivated by. They're pro-NHS. When it's pointed out to them that Farage has talked about charging in our National Health Service, because we're obviously very proud here in the UK about our free at the point of use National Health Service. As soon as it's pointed out to them that Farage wants a system where there's charges like some of the, ironically, continental European systems, voters run a mile. They don't like his apparent reforms, apparent sympathies to Russia, and they want to see the economy thrive. And if Reform fight the next election on big tax cuts for the super wealthy, people know that old-style Laffer curve economics doesn't work. They might not describe it as that, but they know that's not going to work. If you have big tax cuts for the wealthy, you're going to have to pay for it by cutting public services. And on those issues, that is a huge Achilles heel for Reform, and it's one that we are going to hunch relentlessly.
Yeah, and I have seen Starmer do this. That's interesting. Are you saying that the party that positions itself to be the most patriotic, flag-waving, Union Jack-waving party in Reform, and the Brexit Party, and UKIP before it, it's now being seen as potentially unpatriotic?
Well, I'll bet. If they're wrapping themselves in Russian flags, they're not seen as standing up for the national interest. People have spotted where he is. People don't like it when people are not seen to stand up for our national interests and feel weak or lily-livered on what is needed to defend the country.
Just finally, a theme in both the elections that have just been and is possible in the next election in Australia is the Gaza vote. And we have a crop of independents coming through in Australia who want to run solely on this issue. You lost your seat in circumstances nobody saw coming. You would have been in cabinet. You wouldn't have time to talk to me.
I would have cancer.
Oh, that's very kind of you, but we all know the truth. If that had not happened, what is your advice to parties trying to combat this from the left?
Well, look, I mean, it is the voters of Leicester South. Well, a sizable number of the voters of Leicester South. I lost by 900 votes, but a good sort of just under 14,000 voters in Leicester South felt that they wanted somebody who would be presumably more vociferous on the issue of Gaza, even though I had repeatedly called for ceasefires, even though I'd repeatedly called for, the rulings of the ICJ and ICC to be adhered to, and had indeed visited the occupied West Bank and have made speeches calling for Palestinian statehood and was associated with Labour Friend for Palestine. I'm now beginning to realise, by the way, that electing an independent member of Parliament can deliver jack shit for them, and have been reduced. These independent Gaza MPs have been reduced to whining about the fact that they don't have places on the powerful House of Commons Select Committee. Well, yeah, McFly. That's what happens when you elect independent MPs. They're impotent. They can't deliver anything. But nonetheless, progressive parties have to understand that there's a huge amount of anger about the situation in Gaza. Understandably so. I was angry about the loss of life. I was also angry about taking of hostages. International parties of the left, progressive parties have to continue to make the case for working to bring about a peaceful settlement to that part of the world. Not easy, obviously. To restate their commitment to trying to bring about a two-state solution, secure Israel alongside a sovereign Palestine. We all know history is littered with attempts at this which have failed, and have failed in the most horrific circumstances, leading to the most horrific, tragic loss of life, as recent years have shown. But international progressive parties have to convince their electorates that this is their commitment and it's something they want to do.
Kamala Harris lost votes over this in Michigan.
And I warned them, actually, funnily enough, that this would happen. I remember meeting people from Michigan and saying, by the way, I'm supposed to be a Labour cabinet minister. And the reason I'm not, the reason I've got time to be here is because I lost on this. You've got to watch it. And they didn't believe me because they thought that people would come out to vote against Trump. And actually, I'll say no. People in the Labour world thought that voters would want to get rid of the Tory government. Now, on this issue, they wanted to send a clear and unequivocal message to their leadership.
And where I was going with that question is, what did it achieve? Because now we've got Trump who talks about a Riviera in Gaza.
Well, I mean, just extraordinary comments, and that is not going to bring peace. And displacing the Palestinians from Gaza is just, in my view, abhorrent. It's not what is needed. We need the international community to do what it can to bring about, as best it can, a peaceful two-state solution. But you're right, it's not achieved anything. The parliamentarians elected here, was it 4 of them or 5? I can't quite remember the number. Not achieved anything, won't achieve anything. They're just whining about not being allowed to sit on committees. I think there was a by-election in Australia where was it a Green or an Independent got elected? But anyway, isn't this going to be an issue in the Australian election? It won't really achieve anything there, I suspect.
Jonathan Ashworth, I would love to keep talking to you, but you need to run to your next meeting.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for joining the podcast. You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Burke. You can find my work at latikambburke.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.